Hi there, it's Audrey again. So, this is a lecture about Chapter 9, an intro to human services. And this chapter is about working within the system. Um, so, just so you know, pretty much all of you working in this field will probably work within an agency when you graduate. I know that I'm in private practice, and that might seem like a typical job for a counselor, but you actually have to be licensed to do that, and that takes at least 2 years. So basically, you have to learn how to work within a system before you can be self employed in any way. So, the first thing the book talks about is the agency environment. The thing about it is, every single agency is completely different. So, it's more like whatever agency you end up in, making sure that you understand how it works. So, every single agency has a mission statement. You should probably read that. They have goals of the agency, whether in the city of Boston or in the greater Boston area. There's a lot of different big human services companies like Bayco Human Services and Riverside Community Care and VinFin. Those are three big ones. Arbor Health Systems. So each one is a little different. It's also very important to understand your job description, to read it and know what your duties are. That's something that hopefully is self-explanatory, but on the next slide, we're going to talk about a job description. And then the organizational climate. A lot of it has to do with like, who are you reporting to? Who is your boss? Who's your supervisor? That's really important to know. And sometimes you might have more than one supervisor or boss. So understanding who those people are and what their role is. So the structure of the agency is the chain of command in the organizational chart. And I'm going to show you a little one. So this is a job description at Child and Family Services for a case manager, which is, by the way, a job that you could be eligible for once you graduate. So in this particular job as a case manager, it's for teen pregnancy and responsible parents. At first, it gives the position objective, like what you're supposed to do, and then the essential functions. So those are like the actual duties of your job. So it's very important to know what those are. Providing counseling and mentoring. I'm not going to read through all these, but make sure you look through what this is, because again, this is something you'd be eligible for. And then the qualifications, it says high school diploma or GED, and 5 years experience working with youth and families. So in this particular job, apparently you don't need an undergraduate degree, but a lot of case manager jobs you would, at least in the Boston area that I'm aware of. Preferred, it says associate's degree in social services related field. So basically, they're saying you're eligible if you just have a high school diploma, but you probably would need some sort of higher education. So, that's basically what you're looking at right now is a typical job description. I've seen so many of these, but it's really important to read it thoroughly and make sure that it's stuff that you'd be willing to do, because look at how many dots there are. There's over 10. So you have multiple duties. So the next slide is an organizational chart. So this one's pretty vague. I could show you some ones from my old places that I've worked, but they're really big and complicated, and I think it would just overwhelm you. But most places, they have a board of directors, so that's like a board of people that are responsible for the agency. A friend of mine works at a place called Raw Arts. There's a board of directors, then there's the executive director, who's like kind of like the president, if you will. And then they put off to the side the administrative staff. And then underneath it, they're basically, I guess those are the departments under it. So recreation, wellness, and health, community partnerships, and family programming. I'm assuming that this is very vague thing right here, but a lot of places have different departments or different, aspects to it. But it's good to see an organizational chart. This one's really not a great one, actually. That would show like where you are in the chain of command, if you will. Usually, when you start out in the field, you're going to be kind of at the bottom, maybe above the secretary or the administrative staff if you're doing something clinical-ish. But you're still kind of at the entry level. So it's good to know like who's the director, even if you don't even like know the director or have any contact with them. It's good to know their name, and just be aware of how the organization works. So the next is part of the chapter talks about resources in the community context. What's important about this is just, it is kind of important to know where the funding is coming from. So for instance, I worked at a lot of agencies. When I worked at BEST, Boston Emergency Services Team, the money was coming basically from Mass Health, because we were billing Mass Health for seeing their patients. And so even though it was considered a nonprofit, but the money was coming in from insurance companies. So you want to know, like, is it a for-profit agency? Is it nonprofit? Is the government paying for it? Like, if you were working for DCF, that would be a government, or is it public? Like, all these things make a difference as far as the staffing and the funding. So revenue sources are usually, the federal would be like DCF or DMH and DCF. State is also a little different. If you're working for the Department of Public Health in Boston, that would be state or local governments. Grants and contracts. My friend who works at Raw Arts, that is completely funded by grants, I think, and fundraising. And then fees and insurance. So if you're working as a counselor and they're taking insurance, like I worked at Arbor Community Health in Jamaica Plain for many years, and like that we were billing the insurance company. So the money came from the insurance and from people paying copays, and then donations. So if you work, like, let's say you work at a homeless shelter, a lot of the money from a homeless shelter might be coming from grants and donations from, people that donate to homeless shelters. And it might, if it's funded by the Department of Public Health, it's also coming from the local government. So it's just it's kind of a bit public healthy what I'm talking about, but it's important to understand this. Privatization is a for-profit agency supported by contracts and fees. Believe it or not, in our field there are private. There's definitely private hospitals. There's private. There are private I guess private practices basically. So if you're working for a small private practice that's for-profit, that is private. It's not public. Community mapping they talk about, which is basically when they talk about connecting with other agencies and connecting with community members. It's an important thing to do. When I worked at Best, one of the perks of that job is that I got to understand all the different agencies, so I became very aware of them, and then I could do referrals. So you want to build an information network. So when you first start out in the field, you want to be very aware. That's why the internships are great, because you're already becoming aware of all the different places that are available to work at and to do services in the Boston area. So that's basically what you're doing. You're building a network, and then as you work in the field, it'll be easier for you to refer people. So if someone needs a referral for a psychiatrist or a therapist or whatever, you can be like, okay, I can help you out. So when you do refer a client, you have to explain the referral, what it's for. You have to describe the services that you're referring them for. Knowing the contact. So if I say I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist, which I just did a couple days ago, it's like, I know this person, their name is Dr. blah, 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 blah. They're good. I know, I've worked with them. And transmitting the information. That also can be tricky. You have to make sure you have a consent form if you're going to refer someone, and you're going to, and especially if you're going to, you don't need a consent form to just refer someone, but you need one if you're going to tell the referral about that person, if you're going to give them information because of confidentiality. So challenges in day-to-day human services work. There's a lot of challenges, and I think now with the pandemic, there's going to be even more. So allocation of resources. Every agency I've ever worked for has always had, basically a certain budget. Most human services agencies don't have a ton of money, so they're, I remember when I worked at Best, they're like, only give our clients 1 cup of coffee because it's free and 1 snack. And a lot of people would come in that were homeless and they'd want like 3 cups of coffee and they'd want lots of snacks because they're free. And they would be like, nope, you can only give them 1 each, which I always felt kind of bad about because I'm like, hey, these people are homeless. Let's feed them something. But that was their way of making sure they could afford to give everyone that walked in a free cup of coffee and a snack. Paperwork is huge in this field and every other field. You have to make sure you document everything you do practically, and record keeping. Not everything you do, but every time you see a client, it has to be documented in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's only a couple sentences depending on what you're doing, and sometimes it's like a whole progress note. Also, there is competition among services and agencies. I thought that was funny that they talked about that in the book, but it's true. Yes, some agencies are competing for the same clients, right? So if there's a bunch of agencies that provide counseling, and there's only so many clients, obviously they're in competition in a way. So they did talk about that. Encapsulation, they talked about, which was kind of interesting. So burnout and vicarious trauma, these things I've actually written about before. So encapsulation is this idea of like retreating from the engagement of helping and becoming rigid and sensitive and caring. Basically, if you stop being like a caring, thoughtful, nurturing, empathetic person, and you kind of end up being basically you shouldn't be in the field. But anyway, it happens. I think I have definitely seen in my career a lot of people that I'm like, why are you in this field? Because they just don't really like people. It's not that they don't like people, but they have a hard time working with people that are really needy, and that they basically burn out. So it's something to be aware of. A big challenge in human services work is burnout, that you might start having negative attitudes. You might be like, oh my God, these homeless people, they're so dirty and smelly. And this is terrible stuff that I'm even saying, but I've heard it before. So you have to be aware of that. And if you're feeling, very strained by a job, you have to kind of go to your supervisor and tell them that, go to your own counseling, and maybe consider, changing jobs, not out of human services per se, but maybe of your role. So I worked in emergency services for close to 10 years, and I think I did kind of burn out on it. I think it wasn't that I didn't like the clients anymore. I just think the environment was getting to me. Working in an emergency room is kind of stressful. And I was, I had my own family at that point. So I kind of was like, you know what, I think I'm going to do something else. And I resigned. And I'm really glad I did, especially now. And then vicarious trauma happens a lot in our field. It's when you have high exposure to other people's trauma. So, I hear a lot about people's trauma. I hear about people, I've heard people being raped. I've heard about people losing, parents and loved ones. I've heard some really bad stories, and there is vicarious trauma where you kind of feel like, hearing these stories can be really triggering. Hearing about people being abused, hearing about domestic violence. It's really hard to listen to this stuff, but it's part of our job. So you have to be aware of vicarious trauma. There is such thing as having PTSD from other people's trauma. So making sure you have your own counseling, your own supervision, your own resources to help you through that. It is a challenging field. I don't want to pretend that it's not. It can be very difficult to sit with people that are in pain and listen to their stories, because if you're a caring, empathetic person, it's hard to listen to. Professional development, they talk about in this chapter, they talk about, obviously you're getting your undergraduate degree in psychology and human services, so you're doing professional development right now. The internships are key. I urge all of you to do both of them, the junior year one and the senior year one. They're great opportunity. Yes, you're working for free, but I promise you, if you do a good job, those agencies will hire you after you graduate. So then you'll have a job right out of graduation, or right after graduating, which would be awesome. Doing any trainings, remember, even the thing that we did for ABA, that was kind of a training. I mean, we didn't get any CEUs, but we sat through a training, and now I think you guys all understand it better. So those are really important. It's very important to do anything that makes you understand more about the field. It's a big field. So also, once you graduate, and certainly once you get your license, which usually that's further down the road. But anyway, the point is that you have to do CEUs, which are continuing education credits. I have to do them. So you never stop learning, essentially. Building competence is basically just working in the field. That's why you should do as many internships as you can. And they talk about promoting change in a dynamic world, community organization, empowerment, activism. I personally have done some activism in my lifetime. I've protested wars. I've protested a lot of the Trump bullshit. I did the Women's March. If that's, I'm not saying you have to be into that, but, as a counselor, I think there is definitely a social justice component, to what we do. And it's good to try and empower people to stand up for themselves and their own rights. Because you see a lot of injustice. I guess that's the best way to put it. Developing skills in response to human needs. That's something also about building competence. Promoting change and advocacy, pretty much similar to the other one. Using a model of client empowerment. That's right. You need to empower your clients to help themselves. You don't just solve people's problems. You have to help your clients stand up for themselves, be self-advocates, and solve their own problems. That's really what we're trying to do. And the last one, this is in the book, it's table 9.1, is they have the main points. So you want to make sure you know the mission statement of your agency. The job description thing is important to understand. Chain of command, the organizational chart they talked about, understanding the funding sources of your agency, whether it's non-for-profit or governmental, whatever. And then it talks all about the human services, operations, services, clients, professionals, all that. So that is chapter 9. Make sure you read it and listen to this lecture if you have to again, or I've posted the PowerPoint as well so that you get the sense of what we're talking about. Okay,